start on time. So we have time. Hi, Myra. So I think I will start. Birdie, is this good for you?
Yeah, I think it'll work great.
I'll pull it down and I'll put it back.
Yeah.
Good morning. We hope more people are coming, but we have to start on time because that's what they're telling us. I'm Jane Cole, and I'm on the Forum Committee, and I'm so glad you're all here. And I think you've heard the explanation about mics. When you have a question, we need you to be on the mic for the sake of the online, because this will be online on YouTube. So, or otherwise, Birdie said she'll repeat your question, and so we need to get it on the mic. That's the thing there. So our speaker this morning is Birdie Cunningham. She has end of life doula training. She's working in hospice, which is dear to my heart because I've been through that experience. She's a student at United Theological Seminary. Is that still true? Yeah, okay, that's still true. And so I'm going to turn it over to Birdie right now, and we'll get going and hoping more people from the service will come.
Yeah. Might be a little school start because of the weather. Yeah, they sleeping a little lighter.
All right. Well, thank you. You know, I've been a member here for maybe like 20, 25 years, and I often come to this 10 o'clock hour, and I've throughout the years been like, I wonder if I'd ever get asked to speak on anything. Like, what would I get asked? And so when this email invite came, I actually teared up and was like, and I paused, and I'm like, what is happening? And I realized it was like a dream come true, which felt so good. So I encourage you to make your dreams come true, but it's all to say that it is really, truly an honor to be here and spend this time with you and talk to you about grief. As mentioned, I had worked about 20 years in college health with some amazing colleagues, and I'd always had a dream in the back of my head. I don't know if this will come, if it's still my dream, but to open a hospice organization at some time. And so as I did a death doula training, and then my career ended in higher ed, and I moved over to seminary as a way to make my way and to learn about hospice. And so I'm in the process of doing an MDiv in chaplaincy and interreligious chaplaincy, and anytime we have the ability to write a paper or do a project, I always concentrated around grief, loss, and death, and have done some independent studies while I've been there. And then I moved into hospice work, and I work in bereavement. And so what that means is when the patient comes into hospice, there's usually, not always, but most of the time, there's what I call a circle of support around them. And that circle of support can be many people, it can be just one, and that can be anywhere from a wife, a husband, a partner, children, a neighbor, a friend, and those people around that circle of support, I work with them sometimes before the patient, as the patient is still living, especially if there's a lot of like trauma or a lot of grief. So I see them pre-death, and then I work with the patient themselves if there's a lot of grief and loss at the end of life. And then after the patient dies, I see those people in the circle of support for up to 13 months. And that looks a variety of different ways. And so I do individual grief support with them. And then I also host some grief support groups on a variety of different topics, and those look different. And then some programming around grief and loss. And I work at Ecumen, I don't know if I said that, which is they have buildings and senior living places around as well, and then I work in their hospice area. So yeah, so that's what brings me here today. And I really enjoy in working with people around grief and loss. It's a very magical thing for me, and so I've put together this presentation, and I don't know that it's super linear, but I wanted to give you kind of some different learnings about it, as well as hopefully some helpful things. So I'll first say that I love working in it, and it's also a justice issue for me. I believe we are made to grieve, and a person it's a basic human need, like sleep, air, water. And we live in this pinpoint in the world, in this society, that really doesn't acknowledge that. And we are told, buy this, drink this, do this, cover it up, don't deal with it. And so I want to start by saying I think you're really courageous for coming and honoring that you have grief, or that you want to learn about grief, maybe to help somebody else. And I think it's really courageous work. So I want to tell you that. And then I've been doing a lot of thinking about grief, and I'm coming to see it as also an act of self-care. To tend to your grief is to care for yourself in a self-care kind of way. So, 2 slides in, and hopefully you're feeling good. I've called you courageous, and you're doing self-care. And we'll spend a lot of time talking about grief that comes with death, but first I want to hold this space. So I have this graphic here, and at the in the inner ring here is individual, and we all have our individual grief, right? We often think about our grief that we have around somebody dying, but we also have different griefs that we hold. Perhaps we're moving into retirement, perhaps our bodies are aging, right, and changing, perhaps there's illness. The loss of a dream, I think, there's also grief. We have all these individual griefs, and then we have griefs within our family system or our system that is around us. These could be griefs as losing the family pet. That's a huge loss and grief. This could be moving away from your family home. This could be maybe there is an addiction within the family system. Maybe there's trauma, ancestral or in your family lineage that holds grief for your family. Maybe this is a child being diagnosed with something new, or a relationship between partners, like traveling the road towards divorce. Like, there is grief within our family systems. And then we have grief within our communities. I think of, like, here, Plymouth is a community, and we have Seth leaving soon, and there's grief in that. We are holding grief as a community. This could be grief within your neighborhood. If you have children in schools, maybe there's something within your schools. Maybe you live in a senior living situation, and there's grief within your building. There's tons of grief in our communities. And then on our state level, perhaps there's grief you carry around state policies or different state things happening. And then nationally, I think this really came to light with the election, and if that turned out in a way that you didn't prefer, there could definitely be grief there. And I think even, like, when I think about the election and the grief, I think there's grief we know, but we're also sitting in this liminal space of, like, we don't even fully understand our grief around the election. Like, there's all these different national policies around social justice. And then we get to the world, there's wars, like I'm just naming big ones, right? And then we get to the environment. And this, I think you ask any teenager these days and you hear about grief and the environment. It's a big issue here within our own community. And so I just want to acknowledge that we are swimming, in my mind, we are swimming in grief. And we are doing this as much, we're holding this at the same time as paying mortgages, figuring out dinner, right? This is just, it's so around us and we're swimming in it. So I just want to acknowledge that, knowing that we're going to talk more directly around grief that comes with death. But the learnings, I think, can be transferable. So we will move on. And to start to talk about grief, we really need to start to talk about love. In order to understand some of grief, you can't ever really fully understand it, I don't think, but is to understand the way in which we love. When we love, we feel love all over our bodies, right? We often think love means heart, and in so many ways, love is also happens in our brains. And so a good example of how this works is we are continuously building an attachment to the people we love. We do this, you could think about it as if you have a newborn baby and you pick that baby up and you're holding it and it smiles at you. Your brain is like, whoa, this is awesome. I'm building an attachment to this baby. And that is love, right? And so then there's the people that we love. Here's my father and my son, and I have attachments to them. I love them. And when I love them, I also know where they are in the world. This is going to all make sense. So at any point given during the day, I have a general understanding where my son is. I might, if it's during a weekday, I would know he's in school, maybe not the exact classroom, but I have an idea. My dad, on the other hand, he's not the wildest guy, but I have a general sense where he is. I could probably even get it down to what suburb or city where he is. And this is all known inside of my brain, right? I have this virtual map in my brain. And when it's nighttime and you're in your house and you need a drink of water or maybe to go to the bathroom, you wake up at night and you make your way to the kitchen. And as you let's say your house is completely dark, even if there wasn't electricity on, it's completely dark, you would be able to navigate where to go in that kitchen. And if something was out of place, it would be really odd, right? You would hit the couch or something and you would know that. And so we have these virtual maps in our head of the people we love, and they're always being updated every time we see our people we love. And then we have the world around us. So keep that in mind. So one of the amazing things about grief is you have to use metaphors to talk about it. And this is my favorite metaphor I've come up with, is a doorway. And you're standing at this door, on this side of the door, and your loved one is ill. You may even be grieving. They're at this doorway, and then the death happens, and it is simply a moment in time in which you walk through that doorway. It is, in so many ways, it is so profound and a huge thing, but in many ways, it is just one step of time, right? You walk through this threshold and you enter into this world of grief. And you may be like, I have been grieving, the person has been ill. But when you walk that step, it's a whole different type of grief. It is a grief which becomes a heart-wrenching, painful problem for your brain to solve. And so you also, when you walk over into grief, it's a whole new experience for you. You've never been in this space, right? Even if the person was ill, you have imagined what it's going to be like, it is still not known to you because that person has been in this world around you, right? And now that this person has died, they are no longer in this world around you. And the idea that the person simply does not exist anymore does not follow the rules of the brain has learned over time. We love a person as though they are always going to be here. We don't love them and are like, okay, I love you. Maybe you'll die before I see you. Like, we don't love in that way. We are constantly feeding that attachment in our brain to that person, right? We love fully. And so it just doesn't make sense for our brain. I think this is this little bit is religion does a good part in this, right? If the person isn't here, then where are they? And religion really comes in and helps us answer that questions in beliefs. And so what happens is this magical thinking, and I'm sure some of you have had this, right? Especially if you've had a death, but you can have it over other things as well, where there's two different truths going on. You have this truth that you know the person has died, is no longer here, but it's not true in your brain yet, right? It is though Annie Dillard writes a beautiful book about this, magical thinking. For me, it would be like if my son died, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon every day, on a weekday, I'd be waiting for them to walk through the door. And I would fully think they're going to walk through that door. It is this walking in the two different worlds between what is happening around you and what is happening in your brain. They did some research study on this, and they had rats. And the rats went in for 20 days, went into this into the experiment, and there was a blue tower made out of Legos. And every day it'd go in and have to go around the tower, right, to get its food. And they did this for 20 days. They studied the brain. They had a little cap on the brain. They studied its neurons were firing when that blue tower was there. They took the tower out. The rat brain still went in and went around the tower for 5 days, right? And that's this takes, and I can't tell you how much time. Everybody is different, but it takes so much time to be able to update what is happening in your brain to what is happening around you. And then you need to integrate it and all that. It's a lot of work. So what they've discovered, and I didn't do this at the beginning, Mary Frances O'Connor, she's written a book called The Grieving Brain, and she has really studied it and learned that grieving is a form of learning for the brain. And this is relatively new. And so it's exhausting, right? Remember being in school all day? And here you're trying to learn something every minute of your day. It is hard. And so grieving is learning to live in this world with the absence of someone you love deeply who is ingrained into your understanding of the world. So what this is if my mother dies, am I still a daughter? What does that mean? What does it mean to have this person who I have had the longest relationship in my life with, and they die. It's also maybe a person that I look to and I love these characteristics, and I do not want those characteristics, right? This is the person who I perhaps have conversations to make meaning of things in the world, like to help me understand. It is a person who helps me in the world grow emotionally. And all of a sudden that person is gone. How do I live in this world without them? And this is this could be your best friend, this could be your partner, right? We are constantly making meaning of this world around us through relationships. So then they did a study, and they looked at all the different emotions of grief and what emotions do we think about when we think about grief? If anybody wants to yell out one. Sadness. I feel like loneliness, yes. Disbelief. Anger. I was going to say that one, right? For a lot of people, there's guilt somehow within that story of grief. So many emotions. And what they have discovered is the emotion and the heart of grief is yearning. The yearning is a feeling of intense longing for something else, right? This makes sense to me. As I went through those things, I think this makes sense for people around the election, the yearning for something different than what the result was. And we have this yearning within our grief. And so people often ask, how long will I grieve? It's the magical question I always get. And it is really, I can't give you the answer. It's different for everyone. So as I work in hospice and I work with people who are in the thick of it, especially that first year, I had this gentleman, he was so great. Him and his mom had been through a lot of life experiences. She had really pulled him up throughout life, throughout his experiences, and then she got ill. And he loved her dearly. He moved into her one-bedroom apartment and shared it with her while she was ill. And their favorite thing to do was to go and get the mail, right? They lived in this apartment building. Life gets smaller and smaller as you approach illness and death. And so the mail became their daily ritual, and it was fun. They could go down there, they would say hi to people would ask how they're doing. It was their connection with community. And when she died, he would talk about how hard it was to go get the mail. He couldn't do it. He couldn't do it at first, and then he cried when he went and got the mail. And then one day, getting the mail became getting the mail. Right? And that just kind of illustrates there's this time, and that's different for everyone. I hear lots of stories about the grief around having to eat alone, or maybe it's making less coffee in the morning, right? The grief around that hour in the evening that's just past dinner but not bedtime, and I feel like there's a lot of companionship, and grief is really held in that space. And it might be that you're even just watching TV together, but there's companionship there. It's that hard hours. And then there's the grief of walking through all the different seasons. And all of this is different for everybody as they move along. And so, if grief is learning for your brain gets tired, right? You can't, I think of my kids coming home from school, they're just exhausted, right? Or I think of me in seminary after class, I'm just whew. it is constantly, your brain is constantly wanting to update to keep you safe. And so it's always figuring out what is happening with this grief. Like, where did this person go? Like, it doesn't make sense. They were here yesterday and now they're gone. Like, that doesn't make sense. And so what the brain does, and I want to give you this information so you enjoy it when it happens, when the brain is like, whoa, this is heart-wrenching and it needs to stop. And so I need to put a brake on this grief. And so what the brain will do is it will take you into a labyrinth. So if you think about it, when you were a kid or you have kids, they do mazes, right? You start at one end and you kind of come out the other. A labyrinth, you go in, you circle around, and you come out the same entrance that you went in. The exit and the entrance is the same. And so you can, and you'll probably hear this especially when you meet people who are in the right beginnings of grief. It'll be the questions of like, what if we would have gone to the doctor sooner? What if COVID didn't happen? What if we would have tried this medication? What if I would have picked her up from school and she didn't walk home? What if I would have taken away the car privileges? These questions that you go into and you come out and you have no new information. You have no idea what it would have been like if you went to the doctor sooner. You don't know. You can think you know, but you don't really know. And so the brain sends you into these labyrinths as a way to like calm down the brain so it can have some rest. So if you do it a lot, it becomes a problem, right? But if you do it occasionally, it's good, right? It's because if you think of grief as learning, when you are, let's say you're learning a free throw shot, you're not going to make it every time in the beginning. Like, you have to practice that skill, right? And you actually then sleep and dream about that skill, and it gets integrated into your brain. Like, you're constantly doing this. This is my nonlinear section. I'm kind of going all over for you, but the other thing I want to talk about is I use the metaphor of waves for grief. And I think it's a really good one, if you have been in grief, you've had a grief wave, right? Sometimes you can feel these waves coming, right? And sometimes you can sense them in your body. Sometimes you don't feel them, and it's like, boom. I hear about it often. It happens in the grocery store for some reason. I think it's the music, I don't know. I hear about them a lot from the grocery store. But so this wave comes of emotions, right? And all of a sudden, it can send you off into a space of thinking about your grief for a very long time, or it can just like wipe you out. They come in these waves. And if you're at the ocean, you know the waves never stop, right? And what I love about this idea is that the work of tending to your grief, of working on your grief, is helping you space out those waves. Like, the goal is not to get rid of your grief, right? It's to learn how to tend to it, how to integrate it into you. Some people, I think of it as like bouncing around our bodies in the beginning until it finds a home. For a lot of people, that's in their heart. Some people need to be really logical about grief to have it be ingrained into their life, right? They're more logical thinkers. But as it goes to get integrated and find a home, we spread out the waves, right? So my work in bereavement, I really think, is helping people to learn skills and to talk about and to metabolize their grief. And so that space between their waves begins to stretch, right? And we might have had a death in our past that's like 20 years old. And that wave grief, maybe it's the space between our waves is like once a year, right? And in the beginning, it is like there's storms going on and everything. So I give you that. And then I want to just talk for a couple minutes about the holidays. It is a time of year in which grief can seem more tender for us in some ways. And grief needs to be honored and witnessed. And if you take anything, maybe this is the key, well, there's two. This would be one, is to know that grief will continue to show up if you don't honor and witness it. And you can do this in a bunch of different ways. Because I believe we are made to grieve, you have inside of you, I believe, the wisdom to know what works to honor and witness your grief. I think that resides in you. I can help you figure that out. But we can do this in a bunch of different ways, and I think it's important to do it during the holiday season. One way we can do it would be like lighting a candle during this season. Maybe it's carrying on a tradition that you had with this person. Maybe it's buying a ornament that reminds you of them every year. Perhaps it's listening to their favorite holiday music, right? For a lot of people, it's helpful to go to the cemetery or go to a place at some point during that time. And I encourage you, we're getting really close to the holidays, but I encourage you to have something and to have a plan in place so that when the holiday comes, you have a way to lessen the veracity of the grief, right? You can have a plan to go to the cemetery, and so when your grief shows up, you can say, I have a plan. I have witnessed and honored this person, of course. I'm feeling this grief. I love them so dearly. But I have done this honoring and this witnessing, and so it just kind of helps. It's not to say it's going to take away the grief, but it helps temper it down. And we can talk after. I'm sure there's amazing ideas within this room of how people honor their grief during the holiday season. And also, I want to acknowledge, some holidays, Merry Christmas doesn't have to be super merry every year. It's okay. Parker Palmer talks about the seasons of our life, right? And I think some Christmas seasons are trudging through. And it doesn't mean that every Christmas from now until the end of time is going to be that way. But every Christmas doesn't have to be this great, big, joyful occasion, right? So give yourself some grace in that. This is the other research study I love. So they had these 4 groups in this research study. The first group these were all grieving people, and the first group they said, go out and have a good time. And that could look like whatever they wanted, whether that was going out and dancing, or there was an evening of cards with friends. It was whatever a good time looked like for them. It's not as though they had to spend a ton of money and have this big, huge, fun experience. It was just what is a good time for you? The second group, they had them invite over someone and they talked one-on-one about their grief, right? Maybe it was a close friend and they spent time talking about their grief. The third group, they had them watch movies that were uplifting, like uplifting movies and shows and stuff that brought joy. And the fourth group, they had them journal about their grief. And so the first thing they did was they looked at these four groups and had people judge, like we're judgy people. And of course, the right way to grieve was having the cup of coffee and journaling, right? That was the right way to grieve. And what they found during this research study was that all four of them were super important. So when we think about grief, we can think of it as like a downward spiral of an emotion, right? And these things that brought joy to people created in them this upward spiral of an emotion. And what it did for their grief is it allowed them to take a step back and understand it better. They could make sense of it. They could see that perhaps it's making them feel empathy more, right? They could understand and see how it could fit into their life, right? It was like as though it was another tool in a toolbox. Like you need a toolbox when you work on grief, right? And so there is this huge, huge value in having joy. And having joy is also working on your grief. You have my permission. And it's important, I think, to understand that when you have these moments, they can be small moments, like seeing a red cardinal in the snow, right? Like when you have these moments, to acknowledge them for at least a split second. So not only are you getting the uplifting moment of the joy, but then you're also getting this double bang because you have acknowledged that you are feeling joy in the time of grieving. And I believe to hold joy and grief at the same time is emotional intelligence. And you can do it. You will velocity, I keep saying this word that I can't even say. You will go back and forth between these two, probably so dramatically, but in the beginning, but they will come together, right? And we can spend that time in that space where we can hold both joy and grief at the same time. And so, my parting to you is to remember to be kind and gentle with yourself as you walk through this holiday season and you have your grief, and also to find moments of joy. And so, for that, I have a present for you. I have brought candy canes, and you get two. One is for you, and then one is to give somebody. And you can surprise them, or you can hand it to them in person, but feel the joy of giving somebody a candy cane this holiday season. So I'll pass these around, take two, and feel joy. All right, I'll stop there, and I can ask questions of the group, or if there's questions, I'm also happy just to be done.
Anyone have a question?
Oh my, Chris.
Don't worry. Birdie, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. I will personally just take away the insight that grief is learning and self-care. That's really helpful, I think.
Yeah.
I wanted to circle back to something that you mentioned early on about guilt being one of the emotions in the constellation that happen in grief. And I'm thinking specifically of how, in family relationships, say, that are complicated and, maybe there's an unresolved hurt that happened, and then at the grief of a person's loss, that kind of re-triggers this hurt that happened, and maybe can just create this labyrinth effect. I'm curious, like if this shows up in your hospice work, and if you have any insights into that experience.
Yeah, that is a great question. There's guilt and anger are really present in the work, and especially when there's trauma as well. I have a couple thoughts. One is you mentioned it, guilt can cause that labyrinth, right? And so it is good to be aware when you go into a labyrinth. I work with people and I teach them skills on how to recognize. Like we don't want to be in the labyrinth all of our day, right? And so to recognize when you go in there. And then I think, talking through the guilt, what's behind the guilt, all that we do in session. And then I really believe ritual has been one of the most helpful things that I have done with people around guilt. And that looks different for everybody. And there's exploring with what that ritual could be, and facilitating that, I think. It's powerful work, right? And there is, just like grief, a letting go and of the guilt. And what does it mean to have it ingrained within you and walk in this world holding that? And maybe it never goes, but it is like lowered to a point that's manageable.
I have a question about your work. So I know, childbirth doulas have been around for a long time, the beginning of life. And only recently have I learned about is it grieving doula? What do you call it?
It's death doula or end of life doula is another term people use.
My questions, I guess, two questions, I think. When did that become when did that become a thing? And what kind of training or education do you do? And I know that hospitals employ doulas. In fact, Elena now gives a doula to everybody that works there, that as a baby they get an automatic birth doula.
Yeah.
So I just wondered if that's incorporated into the healthcare system somehow. So maybe that's three questions, I don't know. Anyway.
You're allowed three. Yes, End of Life Doula. It's amazing work. So there is organizations that do training. I did mine through ANELDA, which is kind of like the gold standard. It's the International End of Life. I can't think of what it stands for right now, but you can find it on, and they are an organization that is like doing policy work as well as education. They're like a full-on organization, and I was lucky enough. I took it with the man that started the organization, so I felt it was an amazing training. So you go through a training, it's very intensive, and then you do, if you want to get certified, you do so many hours of work, like volunteer work and work. A lot of hospice organizations, like the Ecumen that I work on, we just started incorporating doulas into our volunteer position, and so sometimes we have doulas meet with patients as part of that overall team. There is nursing homes I know of in the Twin Cities now that hire end-of-life doulas, and there are I can think of maybe one hospital that I know that they're on. I don't know that they're on staff, but and so what a death doula is this is another big passion of mine, is I really believe it's like a human right to have a good death when possible, right? Like accidents happen and tragedies happen, and to define what that good death is really defined by the person themselves. And so a death doula sits down with there's a variety of things you can do. Some highlights are like sitting down with the family or with the person and talking about what does a good death look like for you? What does that mean? I think of like how we write out a birth plan, you can write out a death plan. But does that mean like you want music played? Do you want all the church ladies coming in, or do you want to have it be quiet time with just your family? Like, and how can we honor? How can we thank this person? Is there some forgiveness that needs to happen before this person dies? How can this person say goodbye in a meaningful way to the people they love? And then holding that space for the person. So as, you know, I think because we don't talk about death, we have a lot of misperceptions about it. Like, we think it just happens. And very large percentages of death don't just happen. There's different stages in the end of life process, and there are spaces in there for somebody to come and help guide you. Most hospice organizations love having a death doula because it's another person to help in that care. It does not take this place of hospice at all, but it can be a person that helps navigate to make sure death is happening like this person would love it to happen. The honoring piece is a big one. Some death doulas really work on legacy, which is really fun. So spending time with the person and writing up their life story and making, or whatever that would be for that person, but making sure that there's legacy to pass on. Honoring and witnessing grief is such legacy work. To say at family meals, oh, your smile looks like your grandma's. Like, we love that. We want innately to be part of something. And so helping people build a legacy is another way to do it. And then also, when the person has died, if some people want to do a ritual around the body and what that looks like, helping develop that. And then at the end, coming in, like after, they can help with the funeral arrangements and like, or what service or the honoring, however, if there's something like that. And then at the end, coming in afterwards and really being a witness to what has happened and saying, I saw you grab your mom's hand at the end, and that was a really meaningful experience for her, I'm sure. You know, like witnessing what they have, what has happened, and then ending that relationship, right? Having a healthy ending to it between the death doula and the people. That's kind of some of the work. Did that answer all three questions? Anybody else? When did it become a thing? Yeah, it's. I think it has been. I don't have the exact date or anything, but this is not something new to our world, especially in other societies and other cultures. This would be a very common practice. I think it is one of those things I think is bubbling up right now, and you're hearing more and more about it. Yeah.
Probably one more question, and then we'll close it off.
I don't have a question. I have a desire to express my gratitude for hospice. I was fortunate. My husband and I had hospice to help us through the walk to the end of his life. I could not have kept him at home by myself. As it was, I was with him every day. He didn't have to go to a nursing home. They were there to help with his daily care, but also we had a chaplain that would come in. And it was a beautiful thing, and I do want to thank hospice. If you have not had the experience of working with them, it's wonderful. They provide everything you need, any question you have, and they shared a pamphlet at the end. It was entitled "Gone from My Sight," and I'm sure you're probably familiar with that. That even though the person is gone from your sight, just like a ship going out into the ocean, we know they're still out there. They haven't dropped off the end of the world. So thank you very much.
Yeah, definitely. Another passion of mine, seems to be a theme here, is hospice. And yeah, I have lots to say about hospice, and I think it's so misperceived in so many ways in our society, but it is what I would say, it adds additional support. And like I mentioned, death doesn't usually happen right away, and to be able to support somebody holistically, like through the chaplains, through the medical care, through the bathing, to even alleviate the pressures on a caregiver, right? Hospice can help with that. There's massage, there's music therapy, there's bereavement, and then to know, I'm always like, you should do an ad campaign on this. Like, to know that after you die, your loved one will be connected into grief support and help, like assisted for 13 months. Like, that is amazing. And there's no cost. Like, that just is part of the overall hospice work. So I could go on forever, but I'll stop.
And I have to do all of that, same experience. It's just a marvelous, life-saving thing. Wonderful, for me, anyway, going through it with my husband. Well, how about a nice round of applause for Birdie? So wonderful, the work that you're doing. Coming up, no forums on December 22nd or the 29th, so we will not be here on those 2 days. Next up is January 5th, and that's 2025, oh my. Plymouth members who went on the Civil Rights Tour last October will be here to talk about their experiences, and will share what they learned when they went south. I guess that's the next one to look forward to. So thanks everybody for coming, and I'm sure Birdie will be around here for a little bit if you have questions. Thanks much.